Okay, now I'm going to show you a turkey knot, and this time I'm working with 4 strands of DMC thread, and I have my needle threaded with my loop on the bottom, and this time I'm taking my needle down to the back of the fabric, but I'm leaving that loop on top, and then I'm bringing my needle back up at the left of the base of that loop, and then taking it back down at the right of the base of that loop, and that's just to secure that knot on the top of the fabric. So then I'm going to take another loop and bring my needle up and make another loop right next to it. And this time I'm only going to anchor that right side of the loop. So I'm bringing my needle up to the left of that and then back down to the right of it. So this is all turkey knots are. It's a series of these loops snuggled very close together. So you can see I'm bringing my needle back up right next to that anchor stitch, making another loop on top of my fabric. Your left hand is your best friend, or your non-dominant hand is your best friend in hand embroidery, because I'm holding those loops off to the top so that I can see my working thread and I can see that right side of the loop so that it's easier to make that anchor stitch. So I'm taking my needle up, making that loop, taking my needle back down, leaving that loop on top, holding it off to the top, and then I'm going to anchor the right side of that loop by bringing my needle up to the left of it and back down to the right of it. So the only loop that you anchor both sides of the loop is the very first loop you make when you're doing turkey knots. All the other knots, you're simply making a loop and you're anchoring the right side of that loop as you take your thread down. And when I work turkey knots, I like to work from the left to the right. So even if I'm doing a little circle like a tail of a bunny, I'll start at the top left and do a couple at the very top, and then I'll go down a row and again start over from left to right. And the reason I do that is because you can see those loops. It can get difficult to see where you need to place your anchor stitch. So by going from left to right, you can hold those loops off with your non-dominant hand away from where you're stitching so that you can see it more easily. I just find that it helps me keep my turkey knots a little bit more orderly. And it's also very important, you don't want to leave any areas of fabric visible. You want to cover the entire area you're stitching so that you don't have any gaps, and you'll understand that when we trim down these loops later. But you just want to ensure that all the fabric in the area that you're stitching is covered nicely. And again, I think working from left to right helps you do that. So it's a super fun stitch. It's a little time consuming, but there's nothing like the finished result of a turkey knot, because it gives a really fun fluff and furriness and a wonderful dimension to a finished piece. So though they're time consuming, they're worth it. So that is a turkey knot, and then I'm going to show you how you trim the tops of it when we're all done. I'm not going to stitch a huge area, I'm just going to stitch a small section so that you can see, but you can imagine if you did a full circle what it would look like when it's all trimmed down, but you'll see that in a minute. Okay, so you've got those loops, and then you want to kind of lift the loops up, and you take a sharp embroidery scissors and you just trim the tips of those loops off. And you want to just trim a small portion at a time, because you can't get away what you've trimmed away. You can't get back what you've trimmed away. So just snip a little bit at a time. The edges tend to have little straggler pieces of thread sticking up. So it takes a little bit of time to get it just right, but you just trim down until you have the desired fluff that you are after. But it's really a beautiful stitch.